When American soldiers pushed through the abandoned field hospital, they expected empty beds, discarded bandages, and nothing worth guarding, until they reached the final corridor and found one steel door still locked from the inside, while a fresh cup of water sat beneath the handle and a German medical orderly's coat hung beside it, forcing Lieutenant James Carter to wonder who had stayed behind after every other patient and doctor had disappeared. In April 1945, Lieutenant James Carter led 8 American soldiers into a German field hospital outside a small town east of the Rhine, where retreating units had abandoned wagons, medical tents, and crates of instruments. The main entrance stood open, and papers moved across the floor whenever wind entered through broken windows. Carter ordered Sergeant Miles to clear the wards one room at a time, while 2 medics checked beds for anyone unable to move. They found blood-stained bandages, half-packed supply cases, and several patient tags, but no doctors, nurses, or wounded soldiers remained anywhere in the first 2 wings. At the rear corridor, Private Evans noticed a cup of water resting beneath a steel door whose keyhole had been blocked from the inside. A German medical orderly's coat hung from a hook beside it, and the water still carried small bubbles against the glass, as if someone had poured it only minutes earlier. Miles knocked and called in German, yet no answer came from the other side. Carter tried the handle, found it locked, then noticed deep scratches around the frame that looked older than the hospital's evacuation, suggesting the room had been secured long before the Americans arrived. The medics searched the nearby office and found a ledger listing every ward except the locked room. Page numbers jumped from 27 to 31, and 3 sheets had been cut cleanly from the binding, leaving only a narrow strip of paper beneath the thread. Carter sent Evans outside to question civilians hiding in neighboring houses. An elderly pharmacist said German trucks had left before dawn, but one ambulance returned after the final convoy departed and remained behind the hospital for nearly an hour before driving away without headlights. While Evans reported this, a faint metallic sound came from behind the locked door. Miles raised his rifle, but Carter ordered every weapon lowered and called again, saying they were American soldiers and would provide medical help to anyone inside. A weak voice finally answered in German and asked whether the corridor was empty. Carter confirmed that only soldiers and medics remained, then heard a bolt slide halfway before stopping as another person inside whispered sharply and pushed it back into place. Carter refused to break the door while injured people might be standing behind it. He ordered the corridor sealed, posted 2 men at each end, and sent the medics to search for another entrance through the basement or service ducts. In the basement, Evans found a narrow ventilation shaft leading toward the locked room and a discarded envelope marked with an American prisoner number. The name on it belonged to Corporal Thomas Reed, a U.S. soldier listed as missing since January, turning the sealed room from an abandoned hospital mystery into a possible prisoner case. Carter carried the envelope upstairs and compared the number with the casualty notebook in his map case. Reed had disappeared during a supply truck ambush 70 miles away, yet the envelope carried a hospital admission stamp dated only 3 days earlier, proving that someone had kept his name moving long after the Army stopped searching locally. Subscribe for more forgotten German POW stories like this one. Carter returned to the steel door with Reed's envelope and read the prisoner number aloud. The room went silent for several seconds. Then the German voice asked him to slide the envelope beneath the door, and a hand immediately pulled it inside before the bolt finally moved. The door opened only a few inches, revealing Captain Ernst Keller, a German army doctor wearing a torn shirt instead of his uniform coat. Behind him lay 3 men on mattresses, including an American soldier with a bandaged chest whose identification tag matched Thomas Reed. Carter entered with 1 medic while the rest of the squad remained outside. Reed was feverish but conscious, and he grabbed Carter's sleeve before Keller could speak, warning that the hospital evacuation had not been what it appeared and that several patients had disappeared after being declared fit for transport. Keller showed the Americans 2 other patients, both German soldiers suffering from severe infections. He explained that he locked the room because an SS medical officer named Vogel had ordered all witnesses removed before retreat, and Keller believed the returning ambulance had come back to collect anyone left alive. Miles searched the room and found no weapons, but he discovered a wooden medicine chest with its official seal broken. The morphine compartments were empty, while bottles of saline had been relabeled with handwritten numbers that matched the missing pages from the hospital ledger. Reed explained that he had been captured after the January ambush and moved through several aid stations under a false German name. 3 days earlier, he saw orderlies loading wounded prisoners into trucks that carried no medical markings, then overheard Vogel discussing a warehouse instead of another hospital. Carter asked Keller why he had not evacuated with the regular doctors. Keller opened a cabinet and produced 6 identity tags, including 2 American tags and 4 German ones, all belonging to patients listed as transferred even though Keller had watched them die inside the hospital. Before anyone could examine the tags further, a shot struck the outer wall and shattered a corridor window. Carter moved the patients away from the door while Miles led soldiers through the rear exit and found fresh bicycle tracks crossing a vegetable field toward the town. The pharmacist identified the bicycle as one taken that morning by a hospital clerk named Franz Dietrich. Carter ordered the town entrances watched and sent Evans to the military police with Vogel's name, the warehouse reference, and a request to stop any medical convoy using hospital papers from this facility. Keller then opened the false bottom of the medicine chest and removed a folded transfer manifest listing 24 patients. Reed's name appeared halfway down under a German alias, while a red pencil mark beside 8 names directed them to Site B, instead of the field hospital named at the top. Carter decided the 3 patients could not remain in the building, but Keller refused to move Reed until an American surgical team arrived because the chest wound had begun bleeding again. The locked room had been opened, yet the people inside had created a more urgent problem. 1 man might die during transport, and the paper trail suggested others were already being moved under identities that erased where they had gone. A field surgical team reached the hospital before noon and stabilized Reed in the former operating room, while Keller assisted under American supervision. The surgeon discovered that Reed's wound had been reopened recently and found fresh stitching inconsistent with the older battlefield injury, proving someone had performed another procedure only days before. Reed recovered enough to describe waking after that procedure with a small metal tube taped beneath his ribs. The American surgeon examined the bandage and located a narrow incision beside the wound, but the tube itself was gone and no medical note explained why it had been placed there. Keller searched the room where Reed had been treated and found a drain cover recently replaced beneath the operating table. Under it lay a metal cylinder containing microfilm transport records, apparently hidden inside wounded prisoners so documents could pass checkpoints without appearing in ordinary baggage. Carter immediately sealed the cylinder and ordered every patient manifest collected. The records showed that 8 men marked for Site B had carried numbered cylinders during earlier transfers, while the hospital ledger falsely described each operation as routine wound treatment. Military police reported that Franz Dietrich had been captured at the railway station carrying blank hospital forms and a key marked B14. He admitted working for Vogel but claimed he never knew what the cylinders contained because his job was only to prepare patients for transport and change their names afterward. The key opened a freight locker containing civilian coats, morphine ampoules, and a map of a disused textile factory north of town. Site B was written beside the factory in the same red pencil used on Keller's manifest, giving Carter the first physical location connected to the missing patients. Carter took 6 soldiers to the factory while Keller remained with Reed. Inside the loading hall they found hospital stretchers stacked behind machinery and several locked office cabinets filled with identity cards belonging to German soldiers, foreign laborers, and Allied prisoners. A noise from the basement led Miles to a freight elevator whose controls had been disabled. The squad used a hand crank to lower the platform, and discovered 4 weakened men locked inside a storage room, 2 wearing German hospital shirts and 2 speaking English with British accents. One British prisoner identified Vogel as the officer who selected patients capable of surviving transport and used them to move records, money, or small valuables through medical checkpoints. Men who became too sick were stripped of their identities so the same names could be reused. The discovery forced Carter to stop searching the factory when one rescued man collapsed and another began convulsing. The squad converted a delivery truck into an emergency ambulance and carried all 4 back to the field hospital instead of pursuing tracks leading from the rear loading dock. That choice carried a major consequence, because by the time military police followed the tracks, Vogel and his remaining group had already left the district in 2 medical vehicles. Carter had rescued living witnesses, but the delay gave the organizer time to disappear with more false identities and whatever records had not been abandoned. The reversal began that evening when an intelligence officer developed the microfilm recovered from Reed's wound. Instead of lists of hidden Allied positions, the first frame showed German casualty records, photographs of missing patients, and copies of orders signed by Vogel directing men away from combat units before they could be executed as deserters. Keller recognized several names and told Carter that Vogel had once served as an SS doctor, but had secretly used the hospital transfer system to move selected prisoners, forced laborers, and wounded soldiers beyond the reach of security units during the collapse. The false identities were real, but their first purpose had not been theft. The British survivors confirmed part of Keller's account. They had been moved from a labor detail after a German guard threatened to shoot them during retreat, then hidden at sight under German medical names until Allied troops came closer. Dietrich was questioned again and admitted that the cylinders carried copies of evidence showing which officers had ordered illegal executions and which doctors had falsified death certificates to prevent them. Vogel feared the records would be destroyed if kept in one archive, so he divided them among patients moving on separate routes. Carter asked why Vogel had fled if the operation protected prisoners. Dietrich produced a second notebook from his shoe and revealed that 2 men inside Vogel's group had begun selling identities for money, using the same secret routes to move former security officers away from Allied screening. One of those men was Administrator Klaus Meyer, whose signature appeared on the ambulance order that returned to the hospital after everyone else left. Keller explained that he had locked the final room because Meyer wanted Reed and the German witnesses removed before they could identify the corrupted part of the network. Military police traced Meyer's vehicle through fuel records to a monastery used as a refugee station. Carter arrived with Keller under guard and found Meyer preparing papers for 3 German officers dressed as wounded civilians, while a second ambulance stood ready beside the courtyard. Meyer tried to destroy a case of identity cards in the kitchen stove, but refugee workers pulled the burning papers out with iron tongs before the names were lost. The recovered cards matched several men already listed as dead in the hospital records. Vogel then emerged from the monastery infirmary voluntarily, carrying the original patient ledger and a sealed pouch of microfilm. He had separated from Meyer after learning that the secret evacuation route was being sold, and he had spent the day gathering the surviving documents before surrendering them to Allied custody. Carter compared Vogel's ledger with Keller's manifest and Reed's cylinder. The dates aligned, showing which false identities had protected threatened patients and which had later been reused by Meyer for fugitives, transforming the investigation from a single criminal scheme into 2 different operations hidden behind the same paperwork. The reversal cleared Keller's decision to lock the room from any suspicion that he was protecting Vogel's crimes. He had been protecting the witnesses from Meyer, while Vogel's own records gave the Americans enough evidence to separate rescue from corruption without treating every altered identity as proof of guilt. The next morning, Carter established a temporary records center inside the hospital chapel, where American clerks photographed every recovered identity card before returning originals to sealed envelopes. Keller, Vogel, Dietrich, and the rescued prisoners were questioned separately so no single account could shape the others. Reed identified Meyer as the man who had visited his bed after the hidden cylinder was removed. He remembered Meyer asking whether he had seen the red marks on the transfer manifest, which connected the administrator directly to the attempt to erase witnesses before the Americans reached the hospital. Investigators searched Meyer's ambulance and found jewelry, foreign currency, and blank identity papers hidden beneath the stretcher floor. The items matched no rescue records, proving that he had turned Vogel's secret medical route into a private escape system for men willing to pay. Vogel surrendered the names of 3 SS officers who had bought those identities and provided the railway stations they intended to use. Military police arrested 2 before they boarded civilian trains, while the 3rd reached a displaced person camp using the name of a dead German patient. Keller recognized the dead patient's number from the locked room ledger, and Carter sent the original photograph to the camp by courier. The imposter was identified during evening registration and detained under his real name before he could disappear again. The American records team then restored the identities of the rescued British prisoners and corrected Reed's file, which had listed him missing for nearly 3 months. A message went to his unit confirming that he was alive and receiving treatment under his own service number. German patients who had been hidden from execution squads were documented separately from the men who purchased false papers. Carter insisted that each case carry the reason for the altered identity, preventing later investigators from treating rescued victims and deliberate fugitives as the same category. Meyer faced a formal military inquiry, while Vogel and Keller remained prisoners subject to separate review of their wartime conduct. Their cooperation did not erase other questions, but the hospital evidence could no longer be destroyed or simplified into one convenient accusation. Before the building was evacuated, Carter returned to the steel room with Keller and removed the handwritten number from its door. Inside, medics had already stripped the mattresses, collected the bottles, and packed Reed's belongings for transfer to an American hospital. Keller noticed the cup of water still standing beneath the handle where Evans had first seen it. He emptied it into the sink, folded the medical orderly's coat from the hook, and placed both the coat and the recovered manifest into separate evidence bags. Carter ordered the original ledger, microfilm, identity cards, and witness statements copied for 3 different Allied offices. By nightfall, no single fire, missing truck, or corrupt clerk could erase the record of who had been hidden, who had been sold a new name, and who had survived long enough to tell the difference. The final irreversible event came when Reed left the field hospital on an American ambulance under his true identity, while the rescued British prisoners departed in another vehicle and Meyer traveled under guard in a 3rd. The locked room was left open behind them. Its purpose finished because the people it had protected no longer needed a door to keep their names alive. Weeks later, Carter received confirmation that Reed had returned to an American hospital and that the recovered records had identified several missing prisoners across Europe. He went back once to the abandoned building before it was converted into a civilian clinic and found the steel door standing open, its lock removed. On the windowsill sat the empty cup no one had bothered to pack. Carter left it there because the room no longer held a secret, only the place where a missing American soldier and several forgotten names had waited long enough to be found. Most people know how World War II ended. Very few know what happened inside these prison camps. Subscribe for more Untold WWII stories.